Okay, so if you remember from the last video, I ended it on the note kind of not sure what's next, but this morning I came out and it turns out that what's next is oil pressure, neutral, and rear brake. So I'm focusing on these pieces over here. Let me show you what I got so far. So we'll kind of look back in here. This little doodad right there is the oil pressure switch. It screws into, gosh, where's the camera? Right there, the back of the oil pump. And you can see the copper tip on the end, or brass tip on the end. That's going to get an eyelet and some nuts tightened down on it for the oil pressure. If you remember, this little guy, ouch, this little guy right here, that was fun because I have a cut on my finger anyway, so that just made it worse. This little guy right there, that's the neutral switch on the transmission lid. So this little stub that sticks out, that's a rod that goes down in and works with the top mechanism in the rotary top in this case. And when it's in neutral, there's a tab that comes over and makes contact with that stud, and that's what grounds everything out back to the frame. So when it's in neutral, this becomes a true ground and then lights up whatever light is in the circuit from it. So that's the neutral switch there. And then if you remember from before, that's the rear brake light switch. It's in line, it's a hydraulic system, so when juice goes through, this little guy back in here is the switch. I don't know if I can get the angle on it, but there's two prongs that stick out the back, you know, going that way, and those are going to receive just your basic run-of-the-mill blade style receivers. And so what I did this morning, got myself set up. I want to show you the wiring kind of somewhat under the bike. I'm going to see if I can hold the camera this way, so bear with me, guys. I apologize if the cam work is junk. But if you remember, I had this wire coming out from before. This was blue and yellow. This is coming from the dummy lights up front. And so I took a long stretch of shrink tube and slid it on over top of these two wires, and then pushed the shrink tube up into the frame a little bit before I hit it with the heat. That way this actual hole is protected. The wires are protected from the hole via shrink tube on top of the insulation that's already on the wires. So very stable now. And shrink tube the whole thing down to where I needed to split. And here's kind of the way I do this stuff here whenever there's a split. I mean, million ways to do it, but I run the first shrink tube, which this shrink tube here is just cheap stuff from Harbor Freight. Plain, I'll say it that way. There's nothing inside the shrink tube. It just shrinks the rubber onto the tubes. I'll tell you why that's important in just one sec. And then as soon as it gets to the end of that, then it splits, right? So then what I work on is an individual piece of shrink tube on an individual wire all the way back to this Y. But before I put that shrink tube on and these connectors on the end, you can see how there's another piece of overall shrink tube on the outside, this little stretch right here. I slide that guy up on for future, because at the end of the day, I want that guy to be like one giant sleeve over top of everything, because as you put this piece of shrink tube on, you can only go so far before it hits that Y, that junction with that first inner tube, right? So no matter what you do, like if you were to spread it apart, you'd see colored wire, and that's an opportunity for fray or rubbing or who knows what later on down the line. So inner shrink tube over both wires, single shrink tube all the way back to the junction, and then slide this outer sleeve down. And this is where I use the stuff that's a little bit different. That's where I use this kit here. And the reason I like it is because it actually has adhesive lining. It's got like a glue on the inside, so when you heat it up, it actually squirts out a little glue. See if I can get it to focus. There's a little bit of like a glue that squeezes out the ends, and what that does to me, like, locks everything in place. Like, this isn't going anywhere anytime soon, and it's well down over the junction, so you're never going to see, like, right there you can see that lip. This right here is where the single shrink tube kind of goes. I know I'm geeking out a little bit over shrink tube here, and I'm 5 minutes into a video and really just talking about shrink tube, But it's important because this is what makes wiring last a long time. And I know I said in one of the earlier videos that I don't solder connections. It's a waste of my time personally. And this is what gives me the assurance and insurance that I can get away without doing that. Make solid, really good crimp connectors, crimps down on the wires, shrink tube over that. These things aren't sliding or coming off anywhere. So this is the oil pressure switch ring eyelet. This is that neutral switch. Again, this is a Harley connector part. You got to order these special. That's going to go over top of that neutral lug. One of these days I'll get a phone that actually knows how to focus. And then separately over here I have the rear brake stuff. So if you remember from previous videos, I got the fabric covered wires. I have one of them to a connector that is the high beam, or actual brake light, I guess you'd say. And then the other one is the cloth covered wire that's low beam, and the actual hot coming in for the whole shebang for all of it. Now I've seen some wiring diagrams, and I was actually just talking with a guy by email who was asking some questions. Derek, if you're watching, cheers man, how you doing? Some wiring diagrams actually have this, which way is it? This hot that goes straight to the brake light low beam, running all the way back to battery, or back all the way back to the key switch. And you can do that, especially if your brake light is like an older incandescent or pulling some crazy wattage. But even then, it's overkill. I guess maybe if you were running like 18 gauge or 20 gauge wire or something really light duty, you'd want to run right from the key all the way to the brake light, and then separate power into the switch and out to the high beam. It's just too much overkill. This way I got one wire running from key switch and on. It comes into the switch and also out to hot low beam, and then the switch handles the extra juice going to the brake light. So this is all down here ready to connect. I'll have to use two hands to connect it, but just wanted to show you that that's the cleanliness underneath. I figured out routing where this wire is actually going to go up and over the transmission plate to get to the stuff, so nothing's going to hang down below the bike. That's really important to me because eventually, at some point, no doubt, I'll have to put some sort of a jack stand underneath this bike and lift up. And one of the last things you want is wires going under your frame rails or drop down exposed that can get caught on a jack stand or lift and bend or crimp or break and all that jazz. So everything tucked up. The one wire that wasn't quite tucked enough was the actual hot coming in for the brake, but that I was able to zip tie up to some of the other hoses and tubes that are under there, and it's going to make it all nice and super tidy. So yeah, 8-minute video basically about shrink tubes and connections that were already in the wiring diagram. But hey, this is what it takes. It took me like, what, 2 hours to do just what I've explained here. So as you get into wiring your chopper, make sure you have time, and more time, because this stuff takes time to do it right. And so we'll get this part done, and I'll move on probably next to the key switch. So stay tuned for that. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or thoughts or suggestions, hit me up in the comments below, or you can email to bpeak82@gmail.com. Cheers, everybody.